listening to Mia Horror Stories, and today's story is Never Explore an Abandoned Hospital Alone. The screen will stay completely black, letting your imagination do all the work. No visuals, no noise, just a story that creeps under your skin. Don't skip a second, because every detail builds to the chilling end you won't want to miss. Hallway smelled faintly of mildew and something sour, like old sweat trapped behind peeling wallpaper. The fluorescent lights above flickered erratically, buzzing low, and one bulb died with a soft pop, plunging the far end of the corridor into uneven shadows. There was no wind, yet a cold draft skittered along the cracked linoleum floor, tugging at the edges of a torn patient chart stuck to the wall. Somewhere, distant but steady, a rusty radiator clanked as if trying to cough up a last breath. "Did you hear that?" Emma whispered, squinting into the gloom. She took a cautious step forward, fingers brushing the rough concrete wall for balance. The others froze, exchanging uneasy looks. "Probably just the pipes," Jake said, his voice flat but quick to break the silence. He pulled his phone out, its flashlight casting a narrow beam onto the floor ahead. The screen's faint glow illuminated the peeling green paint and scattered debris, old syringes, a cracked plastic cup, a shredded curtain tangled in a rusted wheelchair wheel. Jake was the first to move again, breaking the silence with a half-hearted joke. "You guys realize this is exactly where some horror movie would start, right?" Emma didn't laugh. She kept her eyes on the darkened hallway, her jaw tight. The hospital had been closed for nearly 10 years, boarded up and forgotten by the city. But it still sat there, massive and brooding, like a monument to quiet despair. "Why did you want to come here?" she thought, catching the edge of a familiar flutter in her chest. Emma Turner, 28, female, a graphic designer by day and an amateur urban explorer by weekend. She had a habit of pushing limits, but underneath her easy confidence was a lingering fear of being stuck, of never making a mark or living a life worth telling stories about. Tonight's excursion was partly about the thrill, but mostly about shaking off the creeping stagnation of her routine. Jake Collins, 30, male, an IT technician with a dry sense of humor and a restless streak. He was Emma's boyfriend and the one who found this place online, convinced it would be the perfect adventure. His calm exterior masked an anxiety about failure, not just in his job, but socially. He liked to keep things light because deep down, he worried about being overlooked. Across from them stood Claire Morgan, 27, female, Emma's childhood friend, and a nurse at a local hospital. Claire had joined reluctantly, citing curiosity, but mostly to keep Emma safe. Claire was grounded, practical, with a tendency to overthink risks. She carried a small backpack with a first aid kit and a bottle of water, habits from work bleeding into her personal life. They reached the end of the hallway where a heavy metal door leaned open, creaking softly on rusted hinges. Beyond was the main lobby, vast and cavernous under the cracked skylight that filtered the moonlight in a sickly, pale wash. The floor was littered with old magazines, fragments of glass, and a few stray syringes. A reception desk lay toppled, drawers spilling paperwork that fluttered slightly in the draft. The atmosphere had shifted. The hum of the city outside seemed miles away, muffled, like a distant memory. Inside, every sound was sharp feet crunching on debris, the scrape of a metal chair dragged across the floor, the faint drip of water somewhere in the bowels of the building. Claire flicked on her phone's flashlight, scanning the lobby with quick, practiced movements. We shouldn't stay long. These places can be dangerous structurally and otherwise. Yeah, I know, Emma said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was already scanning the space for something more than just the obvious decay. Her eyes caught on a rusted elevator shaft cage, its doors half open and black inside. Jake crouched to pick something up, a small, battered key with no obvious purpose. Look at this. Wonder what it opened. Claire frowned. Probably best to leave it alone. We don't know what kind of trouble we could stir up. The sound came then, a faint tapping, rhythmic and irregular, echoing down the corridor to their left. The three froze again. What was that? Jake asked, voice low. Emma swallowed. Probably a rat or something. But her heart was beating a little faster now. They stood there, caught between curiosity and caution, as the tapping came again, slower this time, almost deliberate. Maybe we should head back, Claire said, stepping toward the exit. Jake shook his head. We just got here. Let's at least see the old nurse's station upstairs. It's supposed to be the most intact part. Emma's fingers tightened around the torn patient chart on the wall. Her gaze flicked back to the elevator shaft. The building was full of stories that maybe didn't want to be uncovered. The choice hung in the cold air, thick and electric. Stay and explore deeper into the hospital's dark heart, or leave before something unseen starts to settle in. The tapping stopped the moment Claire suggested turning back. But then, from somewhere deeper in the building, a sharp metallic clang echoed, like a heavy door slamming shut. The sound reverberated off the cracked walls, leaving a thick silence that felt too deliberate to be the building settling. Emma glanced at Jake, who was already heading toward the staircase that led up from the lobby. You're serious about the nurse's station? Jake's jaw tightened. Yeah, we've got a limited window before my phone battery dies. I want to get a few good shots. Come on. Claire sighed, pulling her jacket tighter. Fine, but if anything feels off, we leave. No heroics. The stairwell was cramped and dark, the steps groaning under their weight. Emma's flashlight beam bounced off graffiti-scarred walls, flickering on tangled wiring and shattered remnants of old ceiling tiles. A sudden draft whispered past them, carrying a faint smell of burnt plastic that set Claire's nerves jangling. Halfway up, Emma paused. Hey, where's Jake? Claire's head snapped toward the top of the stairs. Jake was standing at the landing, holding his phone out, flashlight casting a pool of light onto the floor. What's up? Emma asked, catching up. Jake pointed. Look at this. On the cracked linoleum was a deep gouge, scraping across the floor and ending near a loose floor tile that jutted up like a broken tooth. Emma crouched down, peering at the tile. That looks fresh. Claire's brow furrowed. Someone been here, or it's recent damage. Jake tapped his phone to take a photo, then shined the light into the small gap under the tile. It's empty, but I swear I saw something move. Emma's stomach tightened. The building had felt empty just moments ago, but now that certainty was gone. Maybe a rat, Claire said quickly, voice sharp with unease. We shouldn't be poking around. Jake shook his head. Come on, that's just the hospital's usual decay. Let's keep moving. Emma glanced toward the stairwell's exit door at the top of the landing. Something tugged at her, the sense of being watched. The stale air, suddenly too thick. They pressed on into the upper floor's narrow corridors. The nurse's station came into view, a cluttered desk with drawers still intact, yellowed papers strewn about, a rusted metal lamp hanging by a frayed cord. Claire immediately began scanning the area. We should mark our path. This place is a maze. Jake pulled a length of red tape from his backpack, tearing off a strip and sticking it to the wall. Good call. Emma's fingers brushed over a dusty telephone handset. She lifted it, expecting silence, but the line crackled faintly, dead, but strangely unsettling. Suddenly, a low rumble shuddered through the building. The lights overhead flickered wildly, and somewhere nearby, glass shattered. Shit, Claire's voice was tight. That doesn't sound good. Jake's phone buzzed, low battery warning. Emma looked toward the stairwell door. They'd heard it slam shut behind them. She tried it. Locked. Locked, Jake said, testing the handle. Why the hell would it lock? Claire's face went pale. It's an automatic security system, probably triggered when the power flickered. Emma swallowed hard. We're trapped. A wave of panic rose in her chest, but she swallowed it back. Jake was already tapping on his phone, trying to get a signal. No bars. The whole place is dead. Claire took a deep breath, steadying herself. Okay, we stay calm. We find another way out. Yeah, but the stairwell door's locked, Jake said, frustration creeping in. That means the elevator shaft. Emma's gaze snapped to the rusted elevator doors they'd passed earlier. Elevator, Claire shook her head. That thing hasn't worked in years. It's not safe. Better than being stuck here, Jake said. He started toward the elevator doors. Emma hesitated. Her mind flicked back to the key Jake had found in the lobby. Wait, maybe that key opens the elevator doors, she said. It's worth a try. Jake nodded and pulled the key out, fitting it into the lock with a satisfying click. The doors groaned open, revealing a yawning black shaft, a rope ladder dangling from the top. Claire stepped back. No way I'm going down that. Jake peered into the darkness. We don't have a choice. Emma's stomach churned. The narrow, twisting ladder descending into a void felt like a test she wasn't sure she could pass. We'll take turns, Jake said, pulling his jacket off and tying a strip of cloth around his wrist, then looping it around the ladder's top rung. Emma swallowed again. Her usual confidence cracked. What if I fall? What if I'm not fast enough? The fear of failure clawed at her. Claire's voice cut in sharply. Look, I don't like this. We should wait for help. Jake shook his head. No signal. No one knows we're here. The power flicker probably knocked out all communication. Emma felt the tension rise between them. Jake's stubbornness, Claire's caution, and her own creeping doubt. Suddenly, the building groaned louder. a shifting sound like it was settling, or worse, collapsing. "Time running out," Jake said urgently. Emma glanced back toward the locked stairwell door and the shadowed hallways beyond. Every instinct screamed to get out. But the ladder looked like a long, slow drop into danger. She took a deep breath. "Okay, we try the elevator shaft." Claire's eyes widened. "You go first." Jake shook his head. "No, Emma's right. We should all stick together." The tension stretched tight, too tight. From somewhere above, a muffled sound echoed, footsteps, distant but deliberate. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. "Someone else is here," Claire whispered. Jake shone his flashlight upward. The beam caught nothing but dust motes dancing in the stale air. Emma's voice cracked. "We're not alone." The decision hung between them. Climb down the ladder into the unknown below, or risk facing whoever else might be inside the hospital. And whatever else was waiting. The rope ladder swayed slightly in the stale air of the elevator shaft, creaking like an old ship's rigging. Emma gripped the ropes with trembling hands, the rough fibers biting into her palms. Below, the darkness stretched endlessly, but somewhere down there was their only chance. Jake went first, his boots thudding quietly against the metal framework. Claire's voice came up weakly behind Emma. "Be careful. Don't rush." Emma swallowed a rising tide of vertigo and stepped off the landing. The ladder swung beneath her weight, and the cold air bit through her jacket. Every rung felt like a test, every breath shallow and uneven. Halfway down, the movement threw her off balance, and her foot slipped, scraping raw against the ladder. "Emma," Jake's voice, echoing faintly below, made her pulse spike. "I'm fine," she said, though the scrape stung sharply. Claire was still above, her flashlight swinging nervously against the elevator shaft walls. Finally, all three reached the bottom, a small, dimly lit basement service room smelling of mold and rust. Flickering emergency lights cast sharp angles and long shadows, and a tangle of pipes snaked along the ceiling. The sound of dripping water echoed quietly in the corners. They huddled together, a brief reprieve from the oppressive vertical drop. Jake pulled his phone out again, but it was dead. "No signal," he said flatly. "We're completely cut off." Emma scanned the room. A heavy metal door, half open, led into a corridor lined with faded paint and stained floor tiles. This basement level was quieter, less cluttered, but felt deeper underground, colder. They started down the corridor, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the dark like knives. The tapping sound from before was gone, replaced by distant echoes of dripping water and the low hum of what might have been ventilation. Suddenly, a scraping noise came from around a corner, a slow, deliberate sound of metal sliding on concrete. Claire stiffened. What the hell was that? Jake took a cautious step forward, flashlight trained on the corner. Probably rats or a loose pipe. Emma's heart was pounding too hard to be convinced. She crept forward, her breath visible in the cold air. Around the corner, a rusted gurney lay tipped on its side, and beyond it, an old storage closet with its door hanging open. Then a sudden noise, a loud bang followed by a rush of footsteps echoing off the walls. "Someone's here," Claire hissed. "We're not alone." Jake raised his flashlight toward the sound, but it vanished as quickly as it came. The corridor was empty. They exchanged tense looks. Emma's stomach twisted. "We need to find another way out fast." Their second attempt was to reach the hospital's original emergency exit. A heavy steel door, marked with faded red paint, at the far end of the basement. The corridor stretched out before them, narrow and winding, the floor littered with broken tiles and puddles of stagnant water. The air smelled sharper here, with an undertone of decay and rust. Claire led, flashlight bouncing nervously across the walls. Jake stayed close behind, carrying the now useless phone. Emma brought up the rear, keeping her eyes peeled for anything unusual. Halfway down, Claire stumbled on a piece of debris, a rusted pipe bent sharply out of the floor. She caught herself on the wall, wincing. "Are you okay?" Emma asked, stepping back to help. Claire nodded, but rubbed her ankle where a bruise was already forming. "I'll manage." The mood was brittle, each step heavy with fatigue and fear. They finally reached the emergency door, its handle cold and unyielding. Jake tugged at it, but it wouldn't budge. "Locked," he said, frustration seeping into his voice. "Probably sealed when the hospital shut down." Emma's eyes flicked to the thick steel frame. "Maybe there's a way to pry it open." Jake shrugged. "Without tools, not likely." Suddenly, Claire's flashlight beam caught something, a set of muddy footprints leading away from the door and disappearing into a dark maintenance tunnel. "What's that?" Emma asked, stepping closer. "Someone been here," Claire said, voice low. Jake frowned, but who and why? Emma swallowed hard. The thought that they weren't alone was no longer speculation. Exhausted and with their nerves frayed, the three pressed onward, following the muddy footprints down the narrow, claustrophobic tunnel. The walls here were damp, the concrete cold and slick with condensation. The tunnel twisted sharply, then opened into a small room filled with old medical supplies, rusted beds, broken monitors, shattered glass. A sudden clang made all three jump. The noise came from behind a metal cart that had apparently been nudged by some unseen force. Emma exhaled sharply. "It's just the cart." Jake laughed nervously. "Yeah, hospital ghosts remember." Claire shot him a look, but forced a smile. "Let's keep moving." Their third attempt was to retrace their steps back toward the stairwell. Hopping the lock had released with the restored power, though none of them believed it would be that simple. The corridors now seemed more hostile. Dim lights flickered and died. The sound of dripping water grew louder, and the stale air thickened with dust and something else, faint but unmistakable. The acrid smell of smoke. "Smoke," Emma whispered, nose wrinkling. Claire stopped, pulling her jacket tighter. "That can't be good." They followed the smell, which grew stronger as they turned a corner into the hospital's old laundry room. A small fire smoldered in a pile of discarded linens, sending up thin tendrils of smoke. Jake moved to stamp it out with a nearby fire extinguisher, but found it empty. Claire pulled her phone out, but it was dead. No signal. "Great," Jake muttered. Emma's pulse quickened. How did this start? The fire seemed isolated, but it was a clear sign that the hospital's fragile decay was accelerating. Their escape routes could be compromised at any moment. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed behind them. Footsteps again, closer this time. They whipped around, flashlights swinging wildly. But it wasn't a person. A large rat scurried across the floor and disappeared through a cracked wall vent. They all laughed nervously, relief flooding through the tension. But the moment was fleeting. They finally reached the stairwell. Hopping the lock had reset with the flickering power. Jake tried the door handle. Locked. Emma's heart sank. There's no way out up there, Claire said flatly. Jake pulled out the key again. Maybe it works on this door too. He tried the key click. The door swung open, but beyond the stairwell lay a steep drop. The stairs had partially collapsed. Emma's breath caught. The last flight was gone. Broken concrete crumbled into darkness below. Claire's eyes widened. No way down. We can't go back, Jake said, voice tight. And we can't go up. Emma looked over the jagged gap, nausea rising. Their options had shrunk to nearly nothing. The hospital was closing in. They were trapped. The smoke thickened fast, turning cold air into something heavy and wet. It curled around their faces, stinging their eyes and clogging their throats. Emma's chest ached with each ragged breath as they pressed forward, desperate for any sign of an exit. We have to keep moving, Jake gasped, voice rough. The fire's spreading. Claire stumbled, her ankle swollen and bruised from earlier. She caught herself on a rusted pipe, grimacing. I'm not sure how much longer I can. Keep going, Emma cut in, voice sharp despite the panic. We don't have a choice. They pushed deeper into the basement corridor, flashlights flickering and useless against the rising haze. Emma's fingers curled tight around the battered key, still their only real hope. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from behind them. The metal door they'd come through slammed shut with a violent clang. Locked again, Jake cursed, pounding on the door. We're trapped. Emma spun toward the noise. Footsteps closer now, deliberate, heavy. Not human, but something big. Her heart hammered as the shadows shifted. A figure emerged, tall, gaunt, an old man with wild gray hair and stained clothes. His eyes were sunken, darting frantically. Get away, he hissed, voice trembling. You don't belong here. Claire stepped forward. We just want to get out. Can you help us? He shook his head violently. No one leaves once the hospital takes you. Emma's skin crawled. This wasn't a ghost story, but the desperation in his eyes was real, maybe madness, or something worse. She remembered the footprints, the noises. He was the source. Please, Jake said softly. We don't want trouble, just a way out. The man's gaze flickered to the fire smoke curling near the ceiling. The east exit, through the old boiler room, but it's dangerous. Emma glanced toward where the firelight flickered faintly through the smoke. The boiler room was a maze of pipes and rusted machinery, unstable and treacherous. Lead us, Emma said, heart pounding. He nodded once and moved ahead, limping but steady. The boiler room was a labyrinth. Pipes hung low, some leaking hot steam. The The floor was slick with oily residue, and every step echoed through the cavernous space. The heat pressed down, sweat mixing with smoke on their skin. Claire winced, limping heavily. Jake helped her, but the strain showed in his clenched jaw. Suddenly, a section of rusted railing gave way under Claire's foot. She yelped, twisting her ankle further and falling hard against a metal beam. Emma rushed to her side. "Can you stand?" Claire shook her head, eyes wide with pain. "We can't leave her," Jake said urgently. Emma glanced around, breath fogging in the thick air. The far wall had a narrow door, barely hanging on its hinges. "We don't have time," she said, forcing herself to stay calm. "Help me carry her." They lifted Claire carefully, moving slower now. Every step was a gamble, pipes hissed, and the floor trembled faintly beneath their feet. Suddenly, a distant roar shook the room. The fire was spreading fast. Emma's heart slammed. They were close now. The old man stopped at the door, gripping it with a shaking hand. "It's locked," he muttered, pulling a rusted keyring from his pocket. Emma's eyes widened. "You have a key." He looked up, eyes haunted. "I lived here once, locked in with the others." With trembling fingers, he unlocked the door, pushing it open into a narrow concrete stairwell leading upward. The smoke was thicker here, choking. Emma coughed, tearing at her sleeve to cover her mouth. They started climbing, step by step. Halfway up, a pipe burst overhead, spraying scalding steam. Jake shouted, pulling Emma and Claire aside. Emma's arm brushed the railing, which groaned ominously. The stairs trembled, then cracked. Claire screamed as the railing gave way beneath her hand. Emma lunged, grabbing Claire's wrist just before she fell into the smoke-filled abyss below. Jake caught Claire's other arm, hauling her back with every ounce of strength. For a moment, they hung there, breathless, bodies trembling. Emma's mind screamed. This was the moment. One misstep and... "Keep moving," she forced herself to say, voice steady but raw. They climbed the remaining steps, bursting through a rusted door into the cold night air. The city was distant but alive. The faint glow of streetlights and the hum of traffic carried on the breeze. Emma collapsed on the concrete outside, coughing, the taste of smoke thick in her mouth. Claire sat beside her, pale but conscious, ankle badly swollen. Jake pulled out his phone. It flickered weakly, showing a single bar. "Help's coming," he whispered. The old man leaned against the wall, silent now, watching. Hours later, wrapped in blankets and sipping water, Emma sat staring at the dark hospital silhouette behind them. Her hands trembled, the scrape on her palm raw and aching. They had survived, but at a cost. Claire's ankle would take weeks to heal. Jake's stubbornness had nearly cost them everything. And Emma, she realized her own fear of failure had almost trapped them all. The man who had led them out was gone by morning, vanished like a ghost. Emma wondered if he had ever truly belonged here, or if the hospital had claimed him long ago. The night had changed everything. They had escaped the building, but its weight settled deep inside them. The hospital was a burnt-out shell by morning, a blackened skeleton against the pale dawn. Fire trucks had finally arrived, too late to save the building, but but just in time to pull Emma, Jake, and Claire from the chaos of that night. Emma sat stiffly on the back seat of an ambulance, her scraped palm wrapped loosely in a hospital bandage. The sterile white of the emergency room was a harsh contrast to the smoke-stained shadows she'd left behind. Claire was beside her, a thick ankle brace already fastened, her face pale but steady beneath the fluorescent glare. Jake hovered nearby, quietly fielding questions from paramedics, his usual sarcasm muted. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a dull ache and a tight knot in Emma's chest. "You're lucky," the paramedic told Claire as he checked her ankle. A few more steps, and that could have been a fracture. Claire nodded, but didn't say much. Emma looked out the window at the police tape cordoning off the hospital grounds. Officers had begun interviewing the neighbors, trying to piece together how 3 people had gotten trapped inside a condemned building. No one was supposed to enter. Jake had already been cautioned for trespassing, but no charges had been pressed yet. The hospital was a hot spot for urban explorers and vandals, and the police expected the story to get tangled in legal bureaucracy before it faded away. Later, in the quiet of Emma's small apartment, the 3 of them gathered around a battered coffee table strewn with takeout boxes and empty water bottles. Emma's hand still throbbed from the scrape, and Claire's swollen ankle was propped up on a pillow. Jake flipped through photos he'd taken on his phone, blurry shots of broken hallways, peeling paint, and the faint outline of the old man who'd led them out. "No one believed us about him," Jake muttered, scrolling past the images. Emma's fingers hovered over the screen. He looked haunted, like he belonged to the hospital. Claire's eyes darkened. Maybe he did, or maybe it was just years of living alone down there. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Emma felt the weight of everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the what-ifs. The hospital wasn't just a building. It was a trap that had nearly swallowed them whole. And now, the scars were real on their bodies and in their minds. Days passed, and the hospital became a distant headline, an urban legend retold with varying degrees of exaggeration. Emma returned to work, but found the usual hum of her life hollow. The fear that had clawed at her chest in those dark corridors now lurked beneath every ordinary moment. She caught herself staring at locked doors, shadows in the corners of rooms, and the sound of footsteps behind her when no one was there. Jake threw himself into fixing the phone's cracked screen, like mending the tangible could fix the intangible. Claire, ever practical, began researching the hospital's history and the story of a patient rumored to have lived in its bowels long after closure. The details were sparse, but it was enough to feed a gnawing unease. One evening, Emma found herself back at the edge of the hospital's fenced perimeter. The metal gate hung slightly ajar, the lock twisted and broken. Her breath caught. The night was still, but a faint tapping sound echoed, slow and rhythmic, down the empty street. Emma turned sharply. Nothing. Her heart slowed, but the feeling didn't leave, the sense that some stories never end, that some places never truly let go. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked away. the hospital's blackened frame looming silently behind her. The shadows fade for now, but the stories never end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe to Mia Horror Stories, and join our community of horror lovers. If you're hungry for more, check out the next video. Just remember, the scariest part is often the one you don't see coming.